Hello, and welcome to Baltic Ways, a podcast bringing you interviews and insights from the world of Baltic studies. I'm your host, Dr. Indra Ekmanis. Today we bring you a conversation with Dr. Inta Mierinė, recorded on the sidelines of the AABS conference at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, at the end of May. Dr. Mierinė is a professor in the Faculty of Economics and Social Sciences and the director of the Center for Diaspora and Migration Research at the University of Latvia. Our conversation focuses on Dr. Mierinė's groundbreaking research on the Latvian diaspora, as well as her migration-focused project on Ukrainian refugees in Europe, for which she was recently awarded the prestigious European Research Council Consolidator Grant. Stay tuned. Thank you so much, Dr. Mierinė, for talking to us today. Why don't you start? You can give us a little bit of your background, how you came to be in this field. I'd also love to hear about this ERC grant and project that you are embarking on.
So I consider myself a political sociologist, even though research these days is increasingly interdisciplinary. So we use data and theories from many different fields. But my interests have been mostly related to things like political participation, social and political trust, integration, lately also interethnic relations, specifically in the Baltic countries. Diaspora research, of course, and attitudes as migrants, which is what my recent ERC grant focuses on. So I've graduated from the University of Latvia. Since then, I've spent quite a lot of time abroad. I did my postdoc at the University of Warsaw, so I spent almost 5 years in Warsaw, and then I spent a year in Denmark, and then in Germany, then also at the University of Illinois at Chicago with the Modytas Daily Scholarship. Then I also got the Fulbright Fellowship, and I spent half a year at the University of Washington. And then also the Paddox Fellowship, which gave me the opportunity to spend some time at the University of Yale, which was also really, really amazing experience. That's sort of my background. So after doing my postdoc in Warsaw, I returned to Latvia, and this is when we did the large-scale survey of the Latvian diaspora, during which we managed to survey 14,000 Latvian immigrants and members of diaspora in 118 countries, which is the largest diaspora survey conducted in Latvia and actually conducted in any European country. Yeah. It's not just my achievement. I mean, we had a wonderful team who helped me with this. And of course, we also had fantastic people helping us all over the world, and then particularly the diaspora members and organizations and everybody. So that's a whole new story. We actually wrote a book about this and published this in the Springer publishers. So there's a book in English about this methodology, about the things that we found and all of that. We did that survey, and after that, in 2016, I became the director of the Center for Diaspora and Migration Research at the University of Latvia. So I have now led the center for the last 10 years, and so that's been always a part of my work. But in the middle of all that, 2 children were born, so life happened. But just last year, I also became the tenured professor at the University of Latvia, the only tenured professor in social sciences there currently. And also I got my ERC Consolidator grant. That was a long, long journey, like 4 attempts, and finally I got it. So this is just the second ERC grant, European Research Council grant, by any Latvian from Latvia. There's been some from outside of Latvia, but within Latvia it's Professor Ambainis and me who were the lucky ones to get one. So.
Well, of course, congratulations. And tell us a little bit about that grant and perhaps even a little bit about the process and what you hope to achieve with this.
Right, so I don't know. I think it's just maybe my character. I've always been ambitious and I always wanted to challenge myself and see what more I can do and what the horizons are and what else is out there, and always striving for to find out something new and something more challenging. And so this European Research Council grants, they are the ultimate prize, let's say, in European science, because they're the most prestigious excellence grants out there. The competition is extremely tough. But I think this large-scale survey of mine, this diaspora study that we did, it encouraged me and it gave me confidence that I can try, that I can actually attempt to do this. And also because in Warsaw, I used to work for Professor Natalia Letti, who led such a grant the University of Warsaw. So I was a postdoc in that project. So I saw how these grants work. I saw what an amazing opportunity that is, that you can spend 5 years fully focusing on this one thing, on this one particular research. And it's just an amazing opportunity, because these days, oftentimes for researchers in Latvia and in many, I think in any Baltic country, is that we always juggle different projects from sometimes in different fields, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's really where you get to work. Somebody, for example, even just thinking about myself, I worked with issues relating to youth and education, to the elderly in the SHARE project, for example. I've been the country representative of the European Social Survey in Latvia, and currently also the Gender and Generation Program, which is about demographics. So I'm also involved in the demographic research. I've been involved in research on addictions, and it's really a combination of so many things.
Yeah.
So what I really wanted to do is this opportunity to actually focus on something one, and to get that feeling that you understand something deeply, and not just you just rush over some specific topic, right? So I applied for the ERC grant. I think the first time it was in 2000, I guess it was already like 2014 maybe. And the first 2 times I applied with my Diaspora research. So basically what I wanted to do, I wanted to replicate the study that we did in Latvia, also in other countries, such as, for example, in Poland and Romania and other countries. So I got to the finals, but I didn't get the grant. So the next time, again, resubmitted. I get to the finals, and I don't get the grant. And obviously, the time had passed, and then priorities had changed, the situation in the world had changed. So I got a new idea, and the new idea, I didn't qualify for the starting grant anymore, so I applied for the consolidator. And again, the first time I apply and I get to the final, and I want to say that getting to the final is already extremely difficult. Yeah. And essentially, those who get to the final, they have a 50% chance that you're actually going to get funded. And the final means that you get to the interview stage, right?
Yeah.
So the third time I get to the finals, and again I did not get the grant. So it was really frustrating, and I understood that I'm doing something wrong, right? I'm missing something. And the last time I applied, that was already 2 years ago, and now again, I improved my proposal, and this time I was already a tenured professor, so I got some grant to actually fund some consultants for me. I had really good consultants, and they had like a lot of experience with these grants, so they helped me, and I was working extremely hard to prepare for the interview, because I really wanted to get it. Yeah. And I knew that I need some help and I need some advice, and they gave me that advice. And also I'm extremely thankful to those people that agree to be on my you have these mock panels, right? So basically, they would ask you challenging questions, difficult questions, and like they would try to tear you down, like, oh, why is this needed? Like, why don't you think it's just, for example, I don't know, like, why do you think that it's new? Like, and all these things. So like many people helped me on the way, and that's absolutely fantastic, and I'm so grateful to them. And specifically, for example, I also talked to Professor Ambainis, who got the grant, and in the advanced grant. I talked to Dacia Zenovska, who also got the consolidated grant. Well, she's currently based in Oxford University, so and she helped me with her advice. So it was also so important, because like one of the reasons why we don't have more ERCTs is that we don't have that experience, we don't have that knowledge base, right? Because it's really like these are excellence grants, which means that like it's all about scientific excellence. And you don't have like a clear blueprint of how your proposal should look like. Yeah. Like, do you include the Gantt chart there? Do you include to what extent you describe the societal impact? To what extent you describe your team, and all of these things that if you come from a large university in Germany or in the Netherlands or whatever, they share these successful proposals amongst themselves, so they are in a much better position to actually be successful. And we didn't have that experience. And even my consultants, what they told me was that like your proposal looks more like a Horizon grant, because this is what I had an experience, right? Like I had worked as an evaluator for a European Commission for many years, but I had never seen a successful ERC grant proposal. It's both good and bad, because like maybe this is what made it original and made it stand out, okay? But in general, of course, like that wasn't highly probable that I will get it, but somehow I managed to do it. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, well, that is so wonderful, and it also speaks, to that institutional knowledge and the kind of scholarly community, and how important that is to.
And exactly, and I want to say that this year I agreed to become an ERC ambassador. It's basically like a group of ERC grantees who have come together with a mission to help others who want to apply for this grant scheme and and be successful. And specifically, I'm focusing on the Baltic countries. So basically, I've participated in several events organized by the Latvian Council of Sciences, but also in Estonia, also in elsewhere, to talk about my experience and to share some insights and some knowledge that could be helpful to the others. And I have also helped with advice to some other Latvian scholars who are applying to this grant scheme. So basically, this is what I would like to do. I would like to give back because I know how important this kind of advice and help would have been to me. So I really would like to help others and encourage them to apply and to also to be successful.
Yeah, that's wonderful. The example of commitment to the scholarly community and to doing good work within and beyond. But tell us about the research project that is part of this. It's 5 years, if I'm
it's
correct.
5 years. So the whole idea came from observing how different the Latvian society, and not just the Latvian society, but all of the Central and Eastern European societies reacted to Ukrainian refugees compared to what we observed during the so-called refugee crisis in 2015 and 16. And this is actually kind of amazing, even in the words that we choose. Like during 2015 and 16, everybody was talking about refugee crisis. Whereas in Latvia or in the Baltic countries, the number that we received, the refugees, was extremely small. And still, it was a crisis. It was all over the news. And
a few hundred, right?
Yeah, it was a few hundred. And also, because I've been involved in evaluating the migration and integration policies in Latvia for quite some time already. So we've always pointed to the fact that the integration policies are extremely limited and not too successful, let's say, in Latvia. And there hasn't been a political will to solve many pending issues. Like, for example, the issue of housing was never fully solved. Refugees were struggling to find housing. They were struggling to find jobs. They were the situation with the language courses is very fragmented and inconsistent and complicated. Bank accounts, education. There's so many issues that we were unable to solve. And then we get 40,000 Ukrainian refugees, and suddenly everything becomes possible, right?
Yeah.
They get immediate access to the labor market. They integrate. They get language courses. We solve the housing situation. People open their doors really to try to help them, sort of in this sponsorship, almost like sponsorship scheme. So it's super successful. So my question was really what made the difference? And it wasn't just the situation in Latvia; it was the situation everywhere, including Poland, including even Hungary. Yeah, of course, there's some complex situation with the Orban at that time, right? But in general, people were just. There was, in the case of Ukrainians, there was no crisis. Nobody talked about crisis. Mm-hmm. Even though the numbers were unprecedented for us, it was absolutely unbelievable. And so it was clear that it was about political will and it was about societal attitudes. And so the question that I asked was how to explain these differences. And I know that some Western scholars basically overlook these differences and explain this simply by racism and cultural closeness. Mm-hmm. Right? Oh, obviously, because Ukrainians are white, and obviously that's it. And those from Middle East, they are, they're different culture. People are just scared and stuff like that. But the thing is that although I'm nobody has cancelled racism, of course, this might explain some of it. But my argument was that when we are looking at migration research in particular, there are specific things that have been largely overlooked, which is issues that relate to social memory, to historical experiences of our own country, mm-hmm. right? To things like willingness to defend certain values, like, for example, democracy, freedom, and all of that. All of these things that Latvians know. And the struggles that we've been through. We know what it means to fight for your independence. We know what it means to defend yourselves against an aggressor such as Russia, right? So also, thinking about this social memory, for example, we still have stories from the Second World War. We do remember the Russian, the so-called liberators, mm-hmm. right? The same kind of liberators that they have in Ukraine these days, right? So these stories get passed from generation to generation, and this was also an important source of solidarity. And it's clear, and what we hear in Latvia, that actually in connection to the war in Ukraine, these stories have again gained a louder, gained more visibility. People talk about this more, and specifically drawing parallels with what Ukrainians are going through, right? It's also about That's the so-called, geopolitical factors. It's about this common enemy, because oftentimes you hear these stories or opinions that basically Ukraine is fighting for us and they are the front line, and basically if Ukraine falls, then we are the next. So there's like a rational self-interest in supporting Ukraine and supporting Ukrainians, and also demonstrating that solidarity with them, because it makes them stronger, it makes us stronger and more resilient and secure versus Russia, right? So these kind of things is something that we wanted to talk about. And we also wanted to talk about the differences in how different migrants are received. Because again, drawing from some previous research of mine, what we know is that even if somebody comes from Ukraine, the attitudes may be different depending on whether this is, for example, a man or a woman, whether they come from the east of Ukraine that is directly attacked every day, right, with missiles and so on, or this is somebody who comes from the from the west of Ukraine, for example, where the risks are maybe less visible. And also, for example, whether somebody is a Ukrainian from Ukraine, or somebody is, for example, a Roma minority from Ukraine, or a Russian from Ukraine, right? Because as we know, in Latvia, for example, there are concerns and that are becoming kind of more visible these days, as the attitudes to the Ukrainians kind of like not as positive anymore as they used to be in the very beginning. So basically there's increasing concerns about whether Ukrainians are learning Latvian or not, or whether they are contributing to the Russian-speaking environment in Latvia, right? Because many are Russian-speaking, many come from the east of Ukraine. Right? So these are the things that the ESA grant focuses on, and this is the novelty that we bring. So now we have a wonderful team. My research focuses not just on Latvia, but we have 4 case study countries. We have Latvia, Poland, Hungary, and Italy as a comparative case. Right, because each of these countries, they have different relations to Russia, different historical experiences, different geographical position, and by this comparative research, it allows to show us, how context affects these attitudes, right? Like Hungary is particularly interesting, right? Like these days, and Poland as well, due to their complex relations with Ukraine, right? The Volyn massacre and all of these things, right? So it's been super interesting. So we have these 3 postdoctoral researchers, and we also have 2 Latvian doctoral students involved in our research. And in addition, we also have involved our Ukrainian colleagues in conducting focus groups with Ukrainians, because one of the things that we didn't want to do, we didn't want to have a survey about Ukrainians without Ukrainians, right? So kind of giving them a voice a little bit as well, right? So how they feel and how this context and how these attitudes, how they impact their daily lives actually, right? And what they would like us to see differently, where they see the main misconceptions maybe are, and so on. So,
and how do you see the culmination?
We aim to publish academic articles first of all, like in top journals. Hopefully, that's the goal. I haven't thought about a book specifically, because in my area it's more common to publish articles. But if it comes to this, we are kind of open to wherever it leads us, because if we end up, for example, finding something that warrants a book, that it seems like, this is such a large and extensive idea that it doesn't fit into an article, we might write a book as well. We also want to produce country reports in the local languages, so that those involved in the survey can also read about the findings. I think giving a feedback to the participants of the study is super important, and also we will also produce policy recommendations regarding how to communicate these issues and how to try to bring society closer and and overcome these complex attitudes that sometimes happen.
I should mention that we are speaking on the sidelines of the AABS conference, and we just chatted a little bit as well about the importance of communicating beyond our kind of academic bubbles and into a variety of different spaces for the public as well, and how important that is also in connecting communities and making the case.
In our research as well, we're going to have stakeholder discussions involving different stakeholders, including, for example, journalists and policymakers and NGOs, and also EU-level policymakers, to see their perspective, and, for example, to see a broader context of how certain policies come to be, and what are the factors that they take into account when designing certain policies, when deciding certain things. So we want to have that perspective. We also want to go maybe a little bit deeper into this journalistic field. Again, thinking about why and who decides to communicate in a certain way, how they decide on this, what goes into the articles. Actually, it's kind of interesting because we already did some preliminary research. Like right now, we've already conducted in-depth interviews with the locals in all of these countries. We are preparing a large-scale survey in all of these countries. But we will do like a really in-depth narrative analysis of both like policy documents, parliamentary speeches, social media, like regular media and all of that. So, and one of the things that we did, we already had some preliminary research to prepare for the interviews. And so we looked at how migrants are shown, like how they're talked about in the media. And what we found was that, especially in Latvia, when we talk about Ukrainians, almost all of the coverage, like literally like all of the coverage is positive. There's no negativity at all. And when we talk about the other kind of migrants, when we talk about the refugees, specifically from Africa, from the Middle East and so on, we were hard pressed to find anything positive.
Wow.
Like it's like literally like we found just a few articles, and so yeah. So the question is really like, why is it like that? And obviously there are more positive stories among like these Middle Eastern refugees, and for sure what we saw in the in-depth interviews is that there were people who had. Quite a few people had some concerns also about Ukrainians, for example, about them not learning Latvian language, about them actually not being as close culturally as one might assume, right? Like, because some people mentioned, for example, well, they're Slavic, we are Baltic. Like, of course, we are like, it's not the same culture for sure. We saw way more concerns in the in-depth interviews, but they never appear in the media. So my question is like, why? And how, like, and who decides really what goes into the media? And it's not just like. It's not just random. There's somebody who's making a decision who goes in and what goes in and what not. So, and how we talk about things, like why is it that we talk about crisis in one case and why is it that we don't in some other case? And what are the words that we use? It's just, again, really interesting because oftentimes like the words that we use in relation to the Middle Eastern refugees, it's actually kind of scary because like
floods and
waves and it's in official media. So obviously the attitudes of the population feed from that. It goes both ways, right? Because the society, of course, large percentage of society don't want migrants from these countries, right? So that's one thing that the journalists pick up. So they kind of feed it back to the society. So, but we end up in this endless circle and cycle of negativity, right? And with Ukrainians, it's a completely opposite thing, right? So, interesting.
Yes. Oh, well, this will be very, very, very interesting to read the further results that come out of this, what sounds like an incredible and massive amount of work and a huge effort. Because we're here and the theme of the conference is diasporas, I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about your diaspora research among Latvians in other countries.
Well, as I mentioned, I started working very intensively on the diaspora research in 2016, as I actually, maybe in 14 or 15 already, with this large-scale survey of mine, right? Then I took over the Center for Migration and Diaspora Research. And basically, before we did this large-scale survey of Latvian diaspora, we started almost like with nothing. There was like a blank page. There were almost no studies of Latvian diaspora. The only ones that were there were very limited. Like, for example, there was a study by our geography colleagues, but that only covered the UK. And basically, they only did the study via Draugiem social network or Facebook or something. Draugiem was more popular at the time, right? So just social media basically, and just the UK. So that was the data that we had, right? So we didn't know anything. We didn't know what their plans are. We didn't know what they do. We didn't know like how about their identities. So there was nothing. And this is what we made our mission, to increase our knowledge of our diaspora and really who they are, what do they do, how do they feel, what do they want to return, and what the barriers are, and so on, and why they leave, so all these things. And so when this is a long story really how we conducted that study, but that was the first sort of snapshot of the situation, these 14,000 interviews. And I've given a lot of talks about this. So many people in other countries were interested in how we managed to do this. And actually just recently I read the scholars from Germany who are citing our work directly, that they got inspired by our methodology and now they are implementing this kind of study. Because oftentimes when we talk about migration research, we get this sort of mostly we get the receiving society's perspective. So, for example, you would see studies of migrants in the Netherlands. So they have all different kinds of communities in the Netherlands, right? Or migrants in Germany, right? But we never really had that sending country perspective. That was rare, not just in the case of Latvia, but that's in generally that's rare. In Europe. Like in Americas it's different because there's been a lot of research on Mexican migration by Mexicans, but like in Europe that was really, really rare. And so that was the innovation. So we concluded a cooperation agreement with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Latvia. And every year they gave us a little bit of money. It was not a big amount of money, but just a little bit of money, something like 20,000 euro a year, to do some research on the topics that, like in the beginning, it was like we had more say in determining what we were studying, and then afterwards, with some of the Diaspora ambassadors, kind of changed, and they decided that basically they will have more say in what we're doing. So right now, the way it works is that I'm a representative of University of Latvia in the Diaspora, this consultative board at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and so basically every year we get feedback from Diaspora organizations. We ask them what topics they would find interesting, and then we basically do research on that. For example, last year we did a study about diaspora investments, which is super interesting. This year we're doing the second already study about the size of diaspora, and Professor Hazans is going to be involved in that. So basically every year, with the help of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, every year we did a study on a specific topic, right? But not just Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we also had some other projects. We had a project with the Ministry of Education and Science about diaspora scientists. We had the Latvian Investment and Innovation Agency. They commissioned a study about diaspora professionals, and some studies with the Latvian State Language Agency about the diaspora schools and language acquisition and all of that. And then we also had this public employment services about the sort of employment opportunities for trainees. So we've had so many studies about all these different topics. So like we really have a lot of baggage that we've accumulated during the last 10 years. So really, like we also did some studies about these organizations where we actually made a list we looked for, and we tried to find every Latvian diaspora organization that is out there, and we ended up finding more than 1,000, which is a surprise for us as well. And so we can see how active Latvians actually are, and the many things that they do. It's just like so many organizations, like starting from like obviously choirs and church communities, but also just like, for example, like just some just groups of people, for example, interested in astronomy, going there or playing cards or something like. I mean, like even these kind of things, and they just gather together and find something. Just they're looking for for other Latvians to spend time with, and it's super nice. So that was interesting. So about diaspora scientists, we've already had 3 different studies, 3 different waves, and the Ministry of Education and Science, they actually have now a person who's responsible for coordinating cooperation with the Latvian diaspora scientists. Things are not going as well as we hoped, because there's still like many opportunities that are not sufficiently used. But at least there's definitely an interest in understanding that there's a huge potential among Latvian diaspora scientists, and the establishing these kind of ties. And again, one of the things that we did is that we tried to identify all of the Latvian scientists abroad, and we ended up with a list of more than 700. Wow. And for a small country like ours, it's like a massive number. And many in the top universities and in such amazing like positions in both administrative and also research. So there's like so much potential. And so I would like to see that like develop more. So it's just like some of the work that we have done.
That's amazing. It kind of circles back to this research that helps other researchers, a full circle effect, if you will. I personally find all of it really, really interesting. Your work on Ukrainian refugees and comparing and contrasting with, what we have termed the 2015 migrant crisis, and how that is very shocking. And I think it's really interesting that you are complicating what is a rather easy answer that has probably taken hold in the West too, about ideas of just racism or cultural closeness and things like that. So that's really fascinating to hear. And this work in the diaspora, it's such a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of opportunity to investigate.
My experience with diaspora research is also very useful in this other research of mine about attitudes towards migrants, because all of this is somehow connected, right? My other kind of research, which is on interethnic relations, which is again what I do. So all of these things somehow come together and overlap, and it's been super interesting. Even though I must admit that like lately with the ESA grant, I just don't have that much time anymore to dedicate to diaspora research. And again, I've been really extremely lucky with good colleagues who are helping me with continuing the diaspora research. So, because somebody asked me the other day here at the conference, like, how many people do you have at the Center of Diaspora Research? And I'm like, there's no fixed number really, because like what we do, the way we organize our work is that every time we just attract colleagues, attract people who are most qualified to talk about these issues. Like, for example, when we do have a study about like diaspora investment, then we attract those like economists, for example, who work on this. We also did a study about diaspora tourism, and then we attract somebody who's an expert on, on tourism. So like every time it's a different group of people. So I'm just the one coordinating and kind of bringing this whole thing together. And what I also want to say is that like in terms of diaspora research, I think it's important to emphasize that like the things that we've managed to do. Also with this large-scale diaspora study, we also asked people who participated for their contacts, and we asked whether they would be interested in participating in further research. And at the time, almost 2/3 of respondents said yes and left their contact information. So we have that database of diaspora, of the members of diaspora who are willing to share their thoughts on various issues. So since then, we have also conducted the second wave of this large-scale survey in 2019. So we were able to see how things have changed. Like, for example, whether more people or less people, like I don't like to say forced people speak Latvian at home, but for example, like forced children speak like because like that's one of the things that we were really interested in, about like the language use in the family, for example, or the forms of political participation or civic participation. So we were able to see how this has developed. So it's super nice. And so we're also planning to conduct the third wave this year, because there are certain topics that are extremely important right now. Like, for example, since 2019, many things have happened. Yeah. We had COVID. We had,
my goodness.
we've had the war in Ukraine starting. Policies in Latvia are changing. For example, there's this discussion about this mandatory military service, which is super important for some, right? So what we want to learn like how people see this, like whether, for example, the geopolitical situation has had an impact on how they view their plans to maybe return or not to return to Latvia. Also this conscription, as I mentioned, right? How they see these kind of policies, and so we want to learn what diaspora thinks about these things. And also the Latvian Language Agency is very much interested again to see how things have changed in terms of Latvian language proficiency and in terms of like language use in the family and in schools and so on. So there are many things that we would like to see updated. So we'll probably approach the diaspora again hopefully shortly, to ask them to participate. And I just want to say that really we're super grateful to all of the people and organizations who have helped us with our research so far, because without them it wouldn't have been possible. And basically the way I envisage the future of like our role as researchers of diaspora is that we would like to establish this diaspora panel as a permanent thing where people could register to be on that panel. Like kind of similar that, for example, research companies have these web panels, right? There are people who are willing to share their thoughts, like from time to time in specific topics. So we would like to establish such a panel of the Latvian diaspora for the reason that we see that this would be super important as a mechanism of consultation with the diaspora. Like, for example, when something like the conscription, like the military, conscription is discussed, then we could just simply like ask a quick question to the diaspora, right? Like, so what do you think? And they could quickly provide an answer. Oh, we like it, we don't like it, we're concerned about this or that, right? So, or maybe some other things like diaspora investments, right? For example, there's certain ideas of what we can do to try to attract diaspora investment to Latvia. But we don't know whether diaspora thinks that this is a good idea or a bad idea or what, right? Like we can ask diaspora organizations. But again, these are just like some people, of course, very informed people, really smart people, right? But this is not the whole diaspora, right? Yeah. Many are not members of diaspora organizations, so maybe they also have something to say. So we would like to be that bridge, right? We'd like to be that bridge to provide that voice of the Latvian diaspora to policymakers, so that the voice is amplified, and so this could be our mission.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful goal and a wonderful way to really incorporate the diaspora voice into policy making that is theoretically also representing the diaspora. And it's also, I think, a good place where we can put a period at the end of this conversation for now, but I think that there will be much to look forward to, much to read from your work coming out, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Personal fan myself.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Baltic Ways, a podcast from the Association for the Advancement of Baltic Studies, produced in partnership with the Baltic Initiative at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. I'm your host, Indra Ekmanis. And note that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position of AABS or FPRI. Subscribe to our newsletters at aabs-balticstudies.org and fpri.org/Baltic-initiative for more from the world of Baltic studies. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.